can you be fit and fat? So some people say that you can be both fit and fat at the same time. Now, obviously, this is a very big debate in the sense of like what is fit and fitness and health and all this sort of stuff. And the reason I'm talking about this is just I saw a video the other day which was on a lady who's a doctor in the UK. She was on this morning and she was discussing her take on the sort of being fit and healthy, fit at any size type philosophy and all that. And some of the arguments that she was making were interesting, and I thought I'd give a physio's perspective on this with regards to injury and musculoskeletal problems. She kind of alluded to a certain thing such as, say, loading, right? So someone who's, say, got bad knees may go to the gym and be given squats to do, which is putting more load through the joints. So to say that, you know, being heavier is going to cause knee pain, therefore doesn't sort of make sense. Now we'll get into this in a moment as to like my view on this. Obviously, you know, these areas have a lot of nuance and they aren't as just simple as they might seem. Now the first instinct of most people is to flat out disagree with this lady and just sort of say, well, no, that's not true. The evidence says this, the research says this, the doctors say this, everyone says this, and disagree with her take. Now we have to sort of give her sort of some sort of respect, I suppose, is the reality, because this is a lady who's intelligent, knowledgeable, she's a doctor. She obviously is putting her view based on the research findings that she's read, which is sounds like she's read a lot. And, you know, just a flat out, you know, layman person on the internet, Slater, which has seemingly happened to this lady, isn't a very good thing. And unfortunately, it's the reality of the world we live in, that anyone who disagrees with the norm that we kind of associate will get out there and just, you know, tell them, no, that's a load of rubbish. But they were far more offensive than that, of course. So I disagree with that. No matter if this lady was incorrect and not quite correct about what she's saying, you know, at the end of the day, just to flat out, you know, abuse her online is not a good idea. But anyway, we're getting sidetracked now. So what we're going to discuss is there any validity to any of the things she's saying? Is she sort of misinterpreting the information? And, you know, we're going to go into that from my point of view. Now, one of the things she mentions is it's correlation, not causation. So people who are overweight, obese, whatever you want to call it, have more knee pain and osteoarthritis of the knee, for example. So this is a correlatory piece of information, and this doesn't establish a distinctively causation component. Now, the reality is this is a weak argument or a weak counter argument, because most research, if not a lot of research, is correlatory, you know, and we have to extrapolate and make sense of this information, and it's always up for elements of nuance and debate and everything else. But obviously, if you do a lot of studies over a long period of time and you're seeing the same correlations, you're going to start linking these things together in more of a causal effect. But it's very difficult, if not impossible, to sort of prove definitively the exacting causation of these things. You know, and therefore I think although this argument in a pure vacuum is true, I think in reality it's a weak argument to sort of just say it's a correlatory element. Now, I like to be open-minded, and I certainly like playing devil's advocate with my own self, and therefore in this context I think I'm going to try and allude to it in this kind of way. Now, the first thing is we know that putting load through joints is actually not inherently bad. You know, when I was younger, my mum said, oh, you don't want to run marathons because you'll wear out your joints, you'll get arthritis in your knees and so on. Well, we've found that evidence supports distinctively that if you do marathon running, you have better levels of arthritis, you know, you're less arthritic than people who don't do exercise sitting at home. So this shows loading through the joints is healthy for the joints. Now, the thing is this is one of the elements of what on this program she mentioned, and she did say that, well, if someone is putting load through the joints and that's good for the joints, how can being heavier therefore be bad for the joints when it is the same principal idea? Now, this is where you have to delve deeper into the nuance of what this actually is all about. Basically, the first thing is progression. So if I get a patient in and I need to get their knee built up, knee tolerance built up, build up is the word, progression is the word I would use. I'll find their sweet spot of tolerance so it doesn't irritate their knee. That could be non-weight bearing, it could be partial weight bearing, it could be weight bearing with just body weight. And the idea is to progress them. So you're bit by bit increasing the demand on that joint. Now this is no different in sport. If you look at, someone saying, well, marathons are good for your knee, then you just go, well, tomorrow I'm just going to run a marathon. Well, that doesn't work. You can't just go and do that because there's no lead into that. There's no progression into that. And we know most injuries and most problems come about from doing too much too soon, overloading too quickly without the body's time to adapt to this kind of element. And we saw this with a study done, which I've mentioned previously, which was on female, I think they were over 50s anyway, and they were, within a year, they were doing 3 times a week. I think it was an hour's worth of exercise, and the exercise was jumping exercise. And to make it progressive, they used little hurdles, which they increased in height over time. The aim being that they were jumping higher, the impact loads were getting greater gradually over time, and they measured the articular cartilage thickness in their patellofemoral joint, so the behind the kneecap joint, and they saw that after a year it had actually got thicker, which means that they'd actually grown cartilage, articular cartilage, which puts them further away from the potentials of osteoarthritis of the patellofemoral joint. So this shows you that loading through the joint was helpful. But it was progressive, started off with low load and built up. So that progressive component has to be in there. And I suppose you could say that if someone's going to gain weight, they don't just go boom and they're heavy. They gain weight more progressively. But it may not always be the case. People can gain weight faster than you may progress them. Bear in mind, they were jumping higher and higher bit by bit over the course of a year. So it shows this is a very progressive component. Someone can go on holiday and gain, half a stone in a week. Well, that's a lot of load extra, which your body hasn't had that time to acclimatize to. Now, we know that tissues acclimatize to load. We know that muscle gets stronger to load. We know that ligament gets stronger to load. We know bone density goes up. We know all these good things occur when it comes to load. And again, that can't necessarily fully explain it's okay to be overweight, therefore, because the tissues will be stronger and adapted to that. Now, that doesn't mean they can't be. But there are reasons, again, we're going to go into as to why this might be, again, another misconstrued piece of information. So it is true that if you were to put 10 stone of weight on me, then I would have to be stronger in my tissues, but I won't be abruptly stronger straight away. But I've seen guys who are 35 stone who can get out of a chair and they don't use their arms to help them out, their hands. This means they are a lot stronger than I am. They're carrying more muscle than I am. Their tissues are stronger than I am. So that is obviously an adaptation to the demand of what their body's placed on them. So this sounds a little bit like I'm agreeing with it. Well, it's not quite as simple as that. So I mentioned progression before, so that's a key component. Obviously, if they gain weight very, very, very slowly, then maybe that is a progressive component of adding more demand to their body. But the big one is volume, right? If I decided tomorrow I'm going to do my squats, I'm going to do them with the same load that I'm used to, right? But I'm going to do it 8 hours a day, every single day, then I'm going to hurt myself. I'm going to overload my body in volume. And that's the big concern here. It's not the load, it's the amount of the load. If you want to get stronger, you want to push your body to adapt by stimulating that load, but without overloading in volume terms the structures you're loading. If you were to squat, like I say, every single day, multiple times a day with super heavy weights or the weights that you are loading at, then obviously you will overload something. You'll be doing too much volume. And that's the difference here, because if I'm going to go and give an exercise for a patient to get their knees stronger, then I'm going to get them to, say, squat as an example, and I'm going to get them to squat maybe 6 to 10 reps, maybe 3 to 5 sets, plenty of rest between so they're recovered, and they're probably going to do it maybe 2-3 times a week. So if you put the total volume there together, it's not a lot of time of doing squats. Whereas if someone is 10 stone overweight as an example, then they're squatting, getting in and out of a car, squatting, getting in and out of a chair, off the bed, on and off the toilet. They're going up and down stairs. That's a lot per day. It's a lot of volume of loading per day. And therefore, that's where I think that the problem lies with this idea is, yes, we can adapt to the load, but we don't want to put that much load in volume-wise because we will cumulatively overload, and therefore that's not going to be helpful. Injuries occur from doing too much you can't recover from. And we load, a short burst load will make our tissues adapt, but then we need to recover while them tissues adapt and then repeat that overload as such. But we don't do it very often because that will cause injury. And we know this causes injury by training too hard too often. So obviously if you're going to be heavy, it's like you're doing squats all day every day or lunges all day every day, which of course is going to be too much volume for that principal idea. And that is where this might falter in the argument stakes. Now the other thing is that, if someone is overweight, the most common way that they're going to get overweight, and I've seen this loads in the recent year with all what's going on in the world, is, people do less activity, so their calorie consumption, the calorie burn reduces, and they're not as distracted by being out and about doing stuff, so they eat more and then they gain weight. So the combination of doing less activity and gaining weight is not actually going to be good with regards to making their tissues more tolerable to load, because their activity levels are going down, but their weight is going up. That isn't what you would want to do if you wanted to make the tissues adapt in a positive way to the load you've got, which means then when they do encounter something that they're not used to, they've got all that extra load, and that's going to have more chance of overloading their tissues, whether it's their joints, cartilage, whatever it is. And therefore that's where most people are. Now, this is where it gets interesting. There is obviously a complete and utter possibility that somebody could increase weight, develop more body weight at the same time as increasing gradually the demand on their body with exercise. So that could be, cardiovascular load bearing exercises combined with some strength training. And at the same time, they're gaining weight. Maybe they're gaining weight in muscle perhaps, but it's, they're not going to gain immense amounts because that's not going to happen. But they might be just eating a lot more and, trying to bulk for whatever reason or whatever. But that could occur. And then in that vein, it's possible that then they can actually adapt their tissues through the stress of their exercises with that increasing weight gradually. That means they've got progression. They've got progression within their exercises. They're not deconditioning their bodies while they're gaining weight so that they are conditioned to their weight. And therefore, they may well never get knee problems or back problems or whatever else. And the other thing we're missing here is that no one ever said that weight causes knee pain, right? It's a risk factor, not a this causes it, because otherwise everyone who's overweight would have knee pain because it would be a direct cause. We know that in the way that the body works and health, there are lots of risk factors, and it's not just one risk factor in isolation that will normally tip someone over the edge into an injury with symptoms. It's usually a mix of lots of different elements. There's genetics in there. There's obviously, in this case, maybe weight is in there, maybe nutrition. So not just about weight, but the quality of your food. It could be sleep, it could be stress, it could be weakness, it could be stiffness. There's so many variables that can be in part altogether as to the risk factors. And if there's something that's a risk factor, it doesn't mean it's going to come to fruition. It's like walking across the road with your eyes shut is a risky thing to do with regards getting ran over. However, just because I walk across the road 10 times with my eyes shut and never get run over doesn't mean, everyone should just do that. It's still a risk factor. It just happens to have not landed on me by chance. And therefore risk factors versus definitive cause is a different kettle of fish. And if you look at the NICE guidelines on knee pain, it shows that weight is a risk factor, but it doesn't mean it will be the only reason or might not be the reason in somebody else's case as to why knee pain would be occurring. So if I was to see a patient who already had knee pain and they were overweight, and I would come at it from the most efficient way possible. So I want to get them stronger and more load tolerant through their joints. But at the same time, if I can bring down their load amounts, then I'm going to get it from both sides, improving them to where they become in that sweet spot of tolerance. Now, I could go about it in the way of, let's not lower your weight, but let's increase your load tolerance by basically building up the amount of exercise loading we are doing gradually until it actually exceeds the level of load that your body weight puts through your body or your knees through a daily basis. That'll take longer. It'll just take longer. If we can bring down load of their body throughout their daily activities, minimizing that cumulative overload, and at the same time, within the short burst acute phases of load training, we build them up, then we bring their load down and their load tolerance comes up, and we get them to tolerating their body weight through their knees faster. And therefore it's much more efficient and effective. And I'm not even discussing the other sides of the coin when it comes to weight. I'm just looking this at the purely injury musculoskeletal perspectives. And this to me is kind of, interesting, because yes, there are going to be people out there who are overweight, who have no knee pain, who are super strong, their activity levels are high, they are fit. Think of some of the forwards in rugby. Some of these people are like 20 stone, right? And they've got a lot of muscle, but they've also carrying fat. There's not that many high-level rugby players who are shredded, full-on six-packs, in the forwards. They're carrying some weight, right? And they're super fit, right? So this means that you can't categorically say that weight on your knees is going to be causing you knee pain. It can be a risk factor, and that doesn't always bring itself into symptoms in some people. So can you be fit and fat? Well, yes, to a degree. And certainly from my point of view that we're discussing today, yes, you can actually have knees that are fine with the load you put through them. And as long as you have progressively built the load tolerance to your level of load. However, in most cases, people don't tend to have done that. Most humans tend to be not that. They tend to be deconditioned, if anything, and they've gained weight in part through that lifestyle factor. So this shows you that it's more about the complexity of all things together, not just weight in isolation, but it's a risk factor we know based on evidence, based on guidelines, based on thinking. Yes, there's a lot of correlation information there, but I think it's a much more nuanced thing than just weight equals problem as such. I'm not going to advocate saying you should just get heavy, but I think it shows you can be healthier and maybe not have knee pain or any other pains related to that. And it's not all about the weight, but it can be. And I think that's the difference. It's not saying it is or isn't. It can be, it might be. And again, it's more complicated than initially meets the eye. But this was a really interesting one. I know that I've gone on a long time in this video, but it was an interesting one because I saw this pop up and I watched it and I was quite interested and intrigued. And I think there has to be some debate around this, which is why I've gone into a lot of detail here. And I think just to categorically go, it's a load of nonsense, what a load of rubbish, is not accurate. And I think is sort of disrespectful, never mind the disrespectful components that we've seen online in this case. But that's my take on it from my point of view, not from like the medical, health, heart, all that side of it, or whatever, it's just from that side of it. So anyway, that's it for this video, and I'll see you next time.